Right, so I think at this point it would be good to talk about collision. I probably didn't explain it too well in the in-game video I recorded last, where I dropped the gun and it sort of clipped into the ground a bit. But in that case, because we were using the NIF scope splice method and I put my meshes into the vanilla NIF, then the collision which we were using is actually the vanilla NIF's collision. So even though it was my hunting revolver barrel in the NIF, it was using the 44 barrel's collision, which would be much shorter and smaller. So if we want super accurate custom collision, then we can simply make our own using 3ds Max 2013. I don't think this collision, well, I think in the most recent version of NIFscope there are collision editing tools, but I find this method to be just really quite easy to do, to be honest. So yeah, first I think I'll just cover what I've done since the last video. All of the mods are now in the scene, and I've just simply snapped them to the grid along by one, apart from this iron sights is on a half grid, but all the mods are simply just laid out so that if I did want to snap them back onto the origin, then I could select the original mesh and just right click the spinner to get it back into the middle if I so wished. But as long as the child node is in line with the mesh, then in game it'll simply snap to the correct child node in the game, so that's fine. There is something that I did just remember. If I was to choose, say, this scope instead of the iron sight, then there'd be no iron sights here. So what I'll actually have to do is take the iron sights mesh, clone it, and then bring it to the, it's quite finicky with this small schematic view, but take it and actually put it underneath the long scope as well, so that when you apply the long scope, the iron sights still stay. You still have the iron sights, if that makes sense. So the iron sights are also part of the long scope. Let me just organize that. Okay, so I'll just export that into enter, and yeah, I might as well convert it. So I've got Elric on the other screen, so I double click it, and then what I can do is open the destination meshes folder, hit Control N for a new folder of the same in the same folder, double click the shortcut, and then I can just copy the mod across easily. If you're doing very rapid iteration, then it's good to have sort of folders open in case you're doing lots of different types of mods, exporting all different kinds. But yeah, I've put all the NIFs into their own organized folders in case I ever want to add more scopes or more grips or anything. I just find it so much simpler, even with a low amount of mods like this. I just find it helpful. Right, so collision. So collision is something that can be quite performance intensive if you do it wrong. For example, if you just auto-generate a collision mesh or anything like that, that usually really bogs down the frame rate, because the game has to calculate each point on the mesh as it's all the different shapes and everything in order for it to accurately collide with the terrain and the collision boxes in the game. So, I mean, if we were to use these meshes as collision, there's so many points there that are kind of unnecessary. You wouldn't need that detail. If you watch the gun hit the ground in real time, quite fast, you honestly wouldn't be able to tell that there's so much collision detail. So what we do instead is actually use proxies, which are representations of the shape but a much simpler way. So, okay, in terms of expense for collision primitives, and by that I mean which primitives are more performance intensive versus not, and which are easier for the game to compute with versus not. The order of expense is the sphere is the easiest, then capsule, then cylinder, then box, and then convex hull is a bit more, quite a bit more expensive than that, and then mesh type collision is absolutely the most expensive which you can use. So why is sphere the cheapest? Well, if you think about it, a sphere type collision is just going to have a single point in the center and a certain radius, which it then calculates if there's anything entering that area to collide with. And a capsule is slightly more expensive than that because it's 2 points with a line calculated between them, and that has it effectively works as 2 points with a join in between, and it calculates the area around that. Then you've got cylinder, which is, I think cylinder and box might be pretty. I'm kind of surprised that cylinder is less, more performance intensive than a box, because I thought, box only has so many points, whereas a cylinder is going to have quite a few, either depending on how many sides there are in the cylinder. But yeah, I'm kind of droning on a bit, so let's start with something really simple, this suppressor. And what we'll do is we'll make sure we've got the muzzles layer selected for new objects, and we'll go to the Create Objects tab, Extended Primitives, and Capsule. Go to the left view, and we're going to drag out. It'll be a sphere at first, and then okay, so it's drawn it out directly facing towards us. I think what I'll do is I'll do it in perspective view just so it's clear what's happening. But if I drag and then let go and then move the mouse and then let go again, that's how you create a cylinder. Let's turn on angle snap and just align it center to the suppressor. So this would be much more, a capsule is a lot more performance friendly than a cylinder, which is why I've chosen to use a capsule. And I doubt you'd ever drop the gun and it would balance perfectly on its end, so you could have a cylinder here and you could sort of prop the gun up on its end, but the entire rest of the time it would be more performance intensive, so you probably want to avoid that and just use a capsule. So yeah, what we'll do is we'll take the capsule, where did I put the muzzles? I think here. Yep, and we'll parent it underneath the original mesh and just give it underscore collision 1, collision mesh 1. And so there's a few things we need to do. We need to add an actual mass to the original suppressor, to the original mesh. Every time you add a collision object, let me just get rid of that tooltip. Every time you add a collision mesh underneath a mesh, you need to give the original mesh an actual weight so that it can drop down in the world, it can actually physicalize, and so it can have physics computed on it. If you didn't have a mass, if you didn't have, well, let's call it a Havoc rigid body because that's what it is. If the mesh doesn't have a rigid body on it, then it would just float in midair. I don't think you can even interact with it, so that would be a problem. It is pretty humorous. I've done it to myself a few times, forgot to add the rigid body. So you will need the Havoc content tools in order to be able to add these elements to the mesh. So I've got these shortcut buttons set up here, but all you have to do is really type in Havoc and then choose rigid body, and then we give it an approximate weight. So I think I'll go with just 1 kilogram for this suppressor. I'm not entirely sure exactly how heavy it is in real life, but as long as it's around a few kilograms weight for the heavy things, and yeah, roughly around this weight. I mean, people aren't going to see the gun fall in the game and think, oh, that's that's not falling at an accurate rate, unless there's some kind of insane gun nut. They probably wouldn't. They probably wouldn't be able to tell that there's the weight's slightly off. So we've added our rigid body to the original mesh, and let's add. So in order for this to actually work as a collision, because right now it's just a standard 3ds Max object, we need to add a Havoc shape to it and give it the correct type. So Havoc shape, a shape of capsule. one thing to note is that I don't think it actually matters. I'm pretty sure it doesn't matter how many sides we give the capsule. When it gets processed by the game into a capsule collider, well, I say by the game, but I mean by Elric. Oh, well, when it gets exported from 3DS, then it will compute this capsule into its own sort of low definition version of the collision. Basically what I'm trying to say is we don't need to worry about how many sides are actually on it. This is just a visual thing so we can judge how close it is to what it needs to be. So we have that set up, and the last thing we need to do is set a collision group. So if we go to this tab and then more and then collision group. Now this is effectively when you drop the object in game and it hits the world, it needs to know what kind of material the collider needs to be so that it knows what sound to make. So for example, if you're dropping a gun, it would make a metal hit sound. If you're dropping a log, then it would make a wooden sound when it hits the ground, stuff like that. So we want to choose material weapon pistol, and give it the weapon object type, and then hit apply to selected with the collider selected. I think I installed some kind of list which allows me to select it like this, but if you don't actually have this, then you can hit custom material. You'll still select weapon from this drop down, I believe, but then you wanna just type in material weapon pistol here. So if we go into creation kit and go under special effects and material type, then these are all the materials in the game which you can use, and they'll all generate different sounds when you drop them. So material weapon pistol is the one that we're going to be using. So with that assigned, we then select the suppressor and export it again. My shortcut worked, there we go. Okay, good, no errors. Now what we can do is, if we come out of this meshes folder with the process NIFs and come to our folder with the raw NIFs and actually select the NIF we just exported, the raw NIF, which hasn't been processed by Elric yet, we can actually ignore the texture. We can actually see the collider as long as we have the collision, toggled on. So we can preview what the collision actually is going to look like. Well, not look like, because you can't see collision. What the collision is going to turn into once you've processed the NIF, because collision's effectively invisible in game. You're not going to be able to actually see it. But this is a really good representation of what the NIF is going to end up having, what kind of collision it's going to end up having once we process it. So let's use Elric, process, and then grab the suppressor, go into our muzzles and paste. So then we look at the process NIF and we can no longer see the collision anymore. So if you want to check your collision, check your raw NIFs. Okay, so that's a more simple one. When you have something a lot more complex like the receiver, let's hide everything else other than it, you're going to want to use multiple shapes. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly go ahead and start adding a bunch of colliders so you can get an idea for how I've just realised I haven't got the right layer selected. So you can get an idea for how a more complicated object would be created. I think it's because I'm in isolate mode. No, why am I not getting anything? Oh, yeah, my bad. I did hit the wrong layer. Okay, right. Now we're in the right layer, I can create properly. So this is quite good for the hemisphere on the back actually, because it matches the shape quite well. So make sure I give it a shape. So if I was to copy this capsule out more times, which I probably will, it'll have the shape on it ready to go, which is good. So let's do the lower part of the frame. Actually, let's do the top. So this time we're going to use a standard box. And then drag it up. Let's actually rotate it so that we can adjust the width and stuff. Yeah, so if you've created an object and then sort of rotated it and done stuff, these names won't exactly be applicable to the shape anymore. You just have to trial and error. Well, height is obviously the origin of the mesh pointing upwards from where you created it. So if it was, I created it facing this way, so height is obviously going to be expanding out in the direction I created it, and if I rotate it this way, then it's the same thing. But length and width tend to be a bit more dubious. Okay, so the reason I've created the box larger than it needs to be for this part of the mesh is because this is in the right place. Hold on. Is because when you export this collision, and if it's a box type, which I'll just add the box collision type here, it'll actually shrink. I don't really know why this is, but box colliders tend to shrink. I think it might be convex hull, but yeah, we're about to find out. So let's take these and find. So this will be our the mesh which we're going to add the rigid body to. Let's make it quite a bit heavier. Let's say 4.5. I think that's about how heavy the Magnum is, and well, let's have 3 actually, because with all the extra barrels and stuff added to it, it's going to all add up to roughly 4.5 if I plan this properly. So this is collision 1, and then collision 2, and then parent them to the mesh which has the rigid body on it. And okay, yeah, then the collision group. So yeah, this is a bit annoying. Sometimes it actually resets itself. So it's probably worth doing all the collision work and then at the very end selecting all the colliders and doing this in one go rather than having to do it every time. Okay, so let's export that. Receiver, export, refresh, and then paste. So if we preview the raw NIF, we can see that the box, if we compare it to the 2013 one, you can see here's the box. Let me isolate to make it clearer. You can see the box is supposed to be this far out from the frame, but it's actually shrunk, especially height-wise, to be, well, yeah, smaller. So just bear that in mind when you're creating box type colliders, is that they don't always, they shrink basically. You need to leave some space. So this lower shape is a bit more interesting. I think first I'll actually, while I'm in isolate view, I might as well copy this collider. It already has the box shape to it, and I'll just use it for the trigger guard. And again, make sure it's quite spacious around it. Okay. So to make things clearer, let's open the material editor and just drag out a standard 3ds Max material. Call it colliders, collision, whatever. Give it a stark color to stand out, and then select all the collision in the scene and give it an opacity of 50. And then when we come out of wireframe view, we can see, well, the opacity isn't really working. I'll look into that after, but we can kind of see where the collision's going on. Oh, it's sort of working. in some weird way. Yeah. 3ds Max viewport isn't exactly, at least by default, not brilliant for materials. But I spend most of the time in wireframe view anyway. Okay, so let's add another box collider, just to the front of the frame. So yeah, that works. And then I'm not going to bother adding a capsule or a cylinder to it or anything to this small shape, because honestly it's so flush with the actual frame, probably doesn't make a difference. However, this hammer does kind of stick out, so if that was to somehow hit the ground, it's a long shot, but we might as well make the effort because we've spent so much effort on everything else. So I'm going to drag this box out, and this time I'm actually going to angle it. Now this makes a big difference because it's no longer classed as a box, because box colliders can only be 90-degree angles, you know, as you've created them. Whereas this is now classed as a convex hull because it has angles to it. And it needs to be, basically needs to be processed in a different way. So again, it's all about optimization. So yeah, let's go with this for the hammer. I could make it more complex, but again, collision doesn't need to be, at least in my opinion, super detailed. So I think we can just export this again without needing to reapply the collision group. Yep, we can. We'll take another look at the raw NIF. And yeah, the box has shrunk, but it's now pretty good shape for the hammer. I'm happy with that. We could maybe extend this back capsule out, if I can find it, amidst all the wires. Or I just go out of wireframe and click on the the red. Then I can sort of extend this out, because the hammer does have a curved part, so I could just extend this out just a bit, just to accommodate that, just a tad. So this bottom part of the frame does have a slight incline to it. So I'm going to have a box, drag it out, deal with the height later. I'm going to add an edit poly to it and sort of adjust the angle of it so that there's an angle that matches the frame more. We'll just center the, I mean to do center object and then center it, and because we've got an edit poly we can just collapse it a bit in, collapse that, and then add a havoc shape, and this is going to be another convex hull. So any mesh with a sort of angled parts to it. I think I created this new, so I'm going to need to do the... Oh good, it didn't change this time for some reason. Oh, am I even selecting the right? No, so I wasn't selecting the right object. Weapon, apply. So any collider with angles to it needs to be assigned as a convex hull. So again, let's take a look at the raw NIF. It's gone. Oh, because I made it new, I hadn't actually parented it to the mesh yet. So we might run into issues now, since I've now added it. Yeah. Okay, box, yeah. Okay, so because I've edited the vertices, I need to collapse, reset Xform on it. So I'm just going to use my shortcut. There, did it. The shape modifier doesn't go anywhere, which is helpful. And then we just export. Good, no issues, and we don't need to convert it just yet because we're not done. Okay, so it's actually really tiny. You can see it a bit there. It's gone super small. So I underestimated how much it was going to be crushed. So let's bring these out again. Reset X4 just to be safe. I didn't really need to disconnect it last time, I realise now, because it's got nothing parented underneath it. I might as well name it properly as well. And then check the raw nerf. Okay, that's a bit better. That matches the frame more. It's not sticking out of the frame, but I'm okay with that. So this curved part, again, curves are the enemy of optimization for both modeling and collision. But we need to deal with the shape somehow. So I think I'm going to, I might do it with some convex hulls on a box, I think. So let's do it like this. Drag this out and rotate. And then maybe just grab one of our boxes. And obviously colliders can collide with each other, so we can have these interacting with each other. And that gives us a sort of slight, well, very low definition curve onto the end, just in case the gun was to ever fall on its grip, then we'd have a slightly more accurate representation of it rolling based on its curve of the grip. So we're not actually going to add collision to, if I unhide the grips, we're not going to add collision to these parts, because they're always going to be here. They're going to be added to the receiver, and there'll always be at least this grip or this grip. So we're just going to go ahead and add the collision to the receiver itself to represent the grips that are attached to it. Maybe a bit more. If I unhide the grips, that'd be a good reference, yeah. Ah, yeah, and these convex hulls need to be really quite wide. Okay, let's see how that goes. Okay, another warning. Yeah, so I moved the vertices again, so I need to just collapse these two. X-form them. Okay, wow, well, this will still kind of work, because I doubt there's any really small colliders that would fit into this tiny gap here. So it still sort of works, but I could overlap these more. Because, yeah, they just become so tiny. So, just make these colliders. Really expand out. Reset X4. And then let's close these old ones and look at the new one. Okay, that's better. That's more of a fit. Alright, so might as well take a look in game and see what the collision, how it behaves. Okay, so we're in game. Let's drop the gun and take a look at the physics. So yeah, good start. Yeah, so you hold E to pick up an object, and then you can hit the left and right mouse button to rotate it, and hit shift to change the axes of rotation, in case you're wondering what I'm doing right now. But yeah, we can sort of bump the gun into different colliders and see, obviously there's no collision on the barrel yet, so the barrel will clip through things. We can see that the receiver, let's try for the hammer. Yeah, you can kind of see the hammer interacting with the collider there. And if I drop the gun in slow motion on the ground, then yeah, you can kind of see, you almost, well, if I drop it very slowly onto from a low height onto the grip, it should roll back. Yeah, yeah, perfect. So yeah, the only time you'd ever really see this on the gun is if you kill an enemy holding it, or if you die and you see it in the death sequence with the third person camera. But yeah, it's still nice to have accurate detail. Honestly, didn't take me that long, and I was explaining at the same time, so it's worth doing this and having perfectly accurate collision, because it just adds a lot to the quality of the mod, the feel of it. Yeah, if you drop a weapon and it clips into the ground, you get a feeling like, wow, this doesn't feel like it belongs in the game. So yeah, that's Collision.